Alright, so Mr. Harper back here. So just to recap what we did in the last video, we created our variables and we created our two functions, one for computer wins, the other for player wins. Just a quick note, you definitely want to make sure in your computer wins variable it says computer score. We're changing computer score by 1, and that we're also updating our computer score text for the computer score and the computer score. And the same thing here for the player wins. Want to make sure you're updating your player score variable and you're updating your, oops, had a mistake right here. I'm glad I just talked about this. Here we have our player score and our player score, but we're setting it to the computer score label text. So let's go ahead and change that to the player score text because it should be updating on the player score. So that's why it's always a good idea to double check your code because everyone makes mistakes. That's just kind of part of programming. Alright, so now that we've got these functions made, what we need to do is call these functions, but we need to call them in the appropriate spot. So what we're going to do is we're going to open up our evaluate winner code, and we're going to look through this real quick and figure out when we need to call our computer wins function and when we need to call our player wins function, which I believe you should be able to pick on really quickly. Or I hope you'll be able to pick up on really quickly. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to move this down underneath here where I have a little bit of white space. Scroll down a little bit because this is 42 lines of code, as you can see. So I'm going to expand this block. And so here's our evaluate winners. So how this is working is I have a couple if-then statements and then I have some nested if-then statements. So I'm going to kind of go over this really quick. So this first one here, the outer one, it checks to see if the player choice and the computer choice are not equal. So that means that the player and the computer, did they pick the same thing? If they didn't pick the same thing, then we're going to go in here to evaluate who won. If they pick the same thing, then obviously that means they tied, which is why this says tie. So then we break it down by the player's choice just to make it simple. So if the player picked 1, which I believe is rock, and if the computer picked paper, that means the computer won. And then I have my else statement here. So that just means that the computer didn't pick paper, they picked scissors. And if they picked scissors when the player picked rock, then that means the player wins. So that's how this is working, and we just kind of broke it down each way based on what the player chose. So what we need to do is, since these are already set up correctly, they tell you who won correctly, we just need to update the score. So what we're going to do, we're going to click on functions, and we're going to call our computer wins function or our player wins function, but we want to put it in the appropriate choice. And we should be able to figure that out by reading what this text label here says. So see how this says computer wins? Well, if the computer wins, then we're just going to call the computer wins function right in there, just like that. And of course, if it says you win, that means the player wins. So let's go ahead and click on functions and call the player wins function. And of course, we don't want to just call it in one, we want to call it in all of these, and there should be just 1, 2, 3, 4 more. So let's go ahead and do this function. Player wins. Let's do our function again, and let's call our computer win function here. And we'll do it again. Functions, computer wins, and then functions again for the last time, player wins. So the last step, anytime we code, we want to test our code to make sure it works. So I'm going to click live test. This pops up. I'm just going to click rock just to double check to make sure it wins. So there's a tie. So I don't have a tie, so it's not going to keep track of ties. If you wanted to keep track of ties, which would be a challenge, you could just make another label, put it up here, call it ties. And then you could just do the same thing we did for the player wins and the computer wins to keep track of the ties. But since we're not, we're just going to play again until we get a winner. So computer wins. So notice it says computer wins and it updated the computer score. So we play again. Computer wins again. Updates their score. Let's see if we can get one where the player wins. And of course, now that I need the player to win, it's not going to show up yet. So we'll just keep practice. We'll just keep going through until we get one that says player wins, just to make sure that that works. Of course, that would be a tie. Looks like I'm not on a roll for this. Wow, the computer won 7 times in a row. There we go. Finally got one in. So the player wins. So as we can tell, these have been updated and they do work. It keeps track of when the computer wins, keeps track of when the player wins. So that will be it for this game. If you want to, for a challenge, you could see if you can figure out how to keep track of all the ties. And that should really work the same way we've done before. You would want to create a variable instead of the computer wins or the computer score or the player score. It should be ties, just to keep track of ties. Then you would want to make a ties function. And anytime there was a tie, you want to change the tie by 1 and update the tie text label, just like we did for the player wins and the computer wins. All right, that's it. And one last thing that you will want to do is make sure you click the share button and share your app and add it into the Google Classroom as a link. That way you can get credit for this assignment. Okay, bye.